Liu Yuxi, thinking of the past at West Pass Mountain. Wang Chun came down river in his warships from Jizhou, and the spirit of kings was extinguished at Yingling. 1,000 yards of chain sank to the bottom. A flag of surrender rose above Stone City. Witness to human suffering through the ages, the mountain still stands guard at the river crossing. Now we are one nation between four rivers. Only autumn reeds whisper among these ruins. So this is the second out of four poems by Liu Yuxi. We've already talked a little bit about him. He was a friend and contemporary of Liu Chongyuan, and he had a very similar fate. Uh, Both of them have only 4 and 5 poems respectively in this anthology, and both were part of the clique of Wang Shuwen. So when Emperor Shunzong rose to the throne, I think in 805, they were catapulted into high positions of power in the administration. But after the abdication of that emperor and the forced suicide of their patron, they were sent into exile into the remotest provinces of the empire. Now, Liu Yuxi did a little bit better than Liu Zongyuan. He also had to spend a lot of years in southern provinces, but in the end, he was recalled back to the capital. He was still quite insolent, though, and he is famous for having composed a poem, something like The Peach Blossoms at Xuan Wu Temple, in which he made a very direct, for the Chinese, satire of the people who had exiled him. So he was sent back again into exile as a consequence. But anyway, after many years in middle posts in the provinces, he came back, and in the end, he got some relatively important mid-level, high-level posts in the administration. He ended up, I think, as tutor of the crown prince, which was quite a prestigious sinecure in the imperial capital. So Liu Yuxi, quite a good poet, mid-Tang poet, friend of Liu Chongyuan, friend of other important mid-Tang poets like Bai Juji or Han Yu, which are better represented in the anthology. And incidentally, as an aside, he's very famous also for incorporating the style and the subject matter of the poems of the peoples that he ruled over, that were semi-Sinicized and barbarians, in a group of songs he composed, the bamboo songs, I think they were called. But anyway, going back to this poem, what's the topic here? Well, it feels, on the face of it, a landscape poem. The poet is passing, probably during one of these periods of southern exile, through the West Pass Mountain, that is relatively close to the middle course of the Jiangsu Valley, if I have investigated correctly. So pretty close to some of the cities and places we've been talking about in poems previously. Yeah, close to Wuhan or Zhou or Hanyang, those places. So passing through the mountain, he thinks about the past. Thinking about the past, historical poems are a subgenre of Chinese poetry which is generally used for criticizing the present. Taking into account the subject matter of the poem and how it ends, doesn't feel quite as a criticism of the present, perhaps as a reflection more of the recent past. So the poem, we will see in a minute, talks about a place, a hill, a mountain, where famous battles took place in the past when the country was divided, and those battles are forgotten because the empire is unified now. So this might be used, this example of remote antiquity might be used as a metaphor or as a stand-in for the remote past of the Anlushan rebellion, which Liu Yuxi wouldn't have lived in as a first-person actor. He would have been too young at the time of the rebellion. I think he wasn't even, yeah, he was probably born, but quite young. So perhaps this contrast between the warlike chaos of the past and the peace of the present, which is actually a flattering portrayal of imperial power, is meant to reflect the success of the emperors, especially of Emperor Shenzong during the Yuanhe era from 805 to 820 in reconstructing and recovering power for the emperors and consolidating the Tang dynasty after the massive period of rebellions that had almost brought it to its knees. So, poem about a landscape place in the south, poem about history, probably, as almost all Chinese poems evoking history, to be read with current history and as commentary of current history in mind, and also about the passage of time and the Ubisoft topic, which is so common in Western literature, seeing the ruins and remembering the people who are no longer there and who live only as memories and as fragments, whether of literature, of the mind, or of the landscape. Okay, then, so as usual, let's take a look at the poem couplet by couplet and clarify its references. So, first couplet: Wang Chun came down river in his warships from Jizhou, and the spirit of kings was extinguished at Jingling. So, probably different battles took place in the area of West Pass Mountain, but here is a specific episode that is being hinted at and which forms the core of the poem. So let's give some historical background. We talked about the period of the three kingdoms after the Han Dynasty collapsed and the empire was divided into three kingdoms: the northern one, Cao Wei; the western one, Shu Han; the southern one, Eastern Wu, with different warlords. So this was at the beginning of the 3rd century of our era. So after a few years had passed, the biggest of those states, the state of Cao Wei, managed to absorb the western one, the state of Shu. At about that same time, some prime ministers of the northern state usurped the imperial position and they founded a new dynasty, the Jin. And finally, in the 270s, 280s, this Jin dynasty launched a campaign to finally subdue and conquer the last remaining of the three kingdoms, the southern one, the kingdom of Wu. Now, the general who was the key factotum of this unification of the last battles that brought the south to heel was this Wang Chun who is mentioned here. He was the governor of the province of Jizhou, and for many years as governor there, he prepared a massive fleet and prepared to lead the troops in the conquest of the south. And this is the episode that is evoked here. Wang Chun's campaign was pretty successful. In a few battles, he managed to reach the southern capital, Jingling, which is referred here, and to get the surrender of the south and the unification of the country. So it was a pretty Pyrrhic victory because the Western Jin dynasty didn't last very long. So hardly 20 or so years after this unification, a massive civil war plus a foreign invasion destroyed the empire again and divided it into a northern part dominated by barbarians and a southern part dominated by Chinese. And this union would last for almost 300 years until the Shui unification at the end of the 6th century. But anyway, so the episode here is Wang Chun is coming down the river with his fleet, and he extinguishes the spirit of the kings at Jingling, which is a very poetic way of saying he put an end to kings ruling independently from Jingling. Jingling, modern-day Nanjing, was the capital of the state of Wu, and it would again be the capital of the southern Chinese emperors during the period of this union, with different names. Jiange was one of the most common ones, apart from Jingling. I think Jingling was the Tang dynasty name for the city. So, first couplet, as I said, evokes this historical event. In the 270s, 280s, General Wang Chun, in the service of the Jin dynasty, comes down the Yangtze and he conquers the south and he takes the capital. The second couplet gives us a little bit more detail about this campaign. Not too much, but just a little bit more, with some specific landmarks. 1,000 yards of chain sank to the bottom. A flag of surrender rose above Stone's city. So we are to imagine that across the Yangtze, probably chains between one bank and the other bank of the river had been placed. These chains were supposed to disrupt or make impossible boats crossing the river because they would have to break the chains before they were able to pass. But Wang Chun's campaign is successful. The chains sink to the bottom of the sea. His boats cross through. And at the same time, a flag of surrender rises over Stone City. Stone City, Shitou, was a very strong fortified city close to Jingling, close to the capital. In fact, the capital was not strategically in a very sound defensive position. So the key to its defense was this fortress of Shitou, of Stone City. But here the sinking of the chains goes parallel with the raising of the surrender flag at Stone City, meaning the surrender of the South. And you look at the parallelistic couplet, look at the contrast. We have a vertical image going down in the third line, the chains sinking, and we have a vertical image rising in the fourth line, the flag of surrender rising above the city. Okay, next couplet, couplet number 3. Witness to human suffering through the ages, the mountain still stands guard at the river crossing. So the first two couplets, as usual, they gave us the description of this military campaign in the past. The second half, the next two couplets, will move us into the present and into the feelings and thoughts of Liu Yuxi and his contemporaries. So this third couplet clearly paints in front of us the mountain as it is now, this West Pass mountain, which was probably close to the Stone City and the place of this, probably the last of the battles that brought the South's surrender. And there's this contrast, which is very typical in Chinese classical poetry, as we've been seeing, between the human and the natural sphere. They're sometimes meant to feed each other in a sort of correlative mood, but sometimes they contrast each other. And in this case, they're contrasting each other. Human suffering through the ages has been mutable and temporal, following human cycles of death, but the mountain, which is a piece of nature, is more stable. Human suffering has passed, the mountain still stands still. It stands guard like a soldier at the river crossing. But, the humans that fought all those epic battles in those encounters, they have disappeared into the air, into thin air. And you have this beautiful image. The only military presence right now is the mountain as a guard. Finally, the last couplet. Now we are one nation between four rivers. Only autumn reeds whisper among these ruins. So this last image, hammers in the point that the time of battles and warfare is over, with probably, again, those overtones of the battles after the Anglo-Shan rebellion, the fights to get the feudal warlords to submit to imperial rule in the recent past have finished now. The country is united and powerful once again, just as the country was united and powerful after, in the remote antiquity, Wang Chun defeated the state of Wu. So now we are one nation between four rivers. I'm not sure what these four rivers might be. Probably the main waterways in China. I would guess, evidently, the Yellow River, the Yangtze. Don't know which the other two might be. Perhaps the Pearl River. It's very important in the extreme south. Maybe the Wei River, because it's in the capital area in Chang'an, or perhaps the Han River. Anyway, four rivers here represent all of China. So now we are one nation between four rivers. And only autumn reeds whisper among these ruins. These ruins of the past that also evoke parts of China ruled independently are no more. Just as no more feudal lords dare to oppose the current emperor and the Tang dynasty has been restored to power, only autumn reeds whisper in the capitals of the past, in the places of battles of the past. In these ruins of fortresses of independent Chinese kingdoms, only autumn reeds melancholy make sound. There are no humans left. So quite an interesting poem in the historical vein, and evoking interesting resonances of the remote past, and always with the past read as a lesson giver to the present, which is a very Chinese thing.